Welcome to Talk Design Podcast, the space where creativity meets conversation. I'm Adrian Ramsey, your host, and as someone deeply entrenched in the world of design, I'm thrilled to introduce you to the minds that inspire me in the hope that they will spark something special within you too. From a design past crafting women's swimwear to pushing the boundaries of performance sportswear, from mountaineering to international yachting, to implementing systematic innovation solutions that transcend boundaries in aerospace industry. My heart remains rooted in architecture, and exploring the emotional tapestry woven by built spaces is my fascination. My journey in design has been what can only be described as a life of design. I want to thank you for lending me your ears. I'm eager to embark on this next episode together. And for those of you who prefer to watch and listen, you can catch this episode at YouTube. That's youtube.com/@TalkDesignPodcast. My guests on Talk Design today, Jes Deaver and Jes Deaver, and they are from Austin, Texas, a place close to my heart, as many of you know. And they have a wonderful architectural company there, and we're going to dig into this team. And I'm not going to tell you any more about that. They've got lots of awards, things like that, of course, but very thoughtful and caring architects. So, guys, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah, thank you. It's a pleasure.
Oh, my pleasure, for sure. Let's start out with a couple of the simple things, like Nick, we're going to start with you because you're the youngest of the two. And
Sure.
tell us about your journey into architecture, and then how Jes ended up, jumping in and stealing your show.
Okay, well, that's a good. I like it. I can start from start backwards and tell you interesting thing backwards, and that is I just recently was at an AIA event where we had met one of the jurists who had flown here from Los Angeles to jury one of our Austin AIA programs for our honor awards, and they had already met Jes, who was being their host, and wow. She led a panel discussion between them, and each one of them took me aside at a little cocktail party and said, Nick, we barely know you, but we know one thing about you, and that is that the best thing you ever did was have Jessica. And I said, I felt I agree with them, but I also wanted to say, well, I don't know, maybe you haven't seen everything I've done.
Yeah, she's just a bit flashier than me.
That's it. But you will discover that there are some qualities here that our firm has now that it did not have without her. But to begin with, this is an interesting question. It's one that I haven't been asked a lot. As we were talking earlier, I'm a little bit of a reserved person. Mm-hmm. Some people think that I'm not, but it's because I'm a bit of a nervous talker when I get in public. So I'll talk a lot and people think I'm outgoing. Not so much. But what I will say is that what brought me to architecture was the fact that I grew up in West Texas, and in a working class family. My dad was an electrical contractor. And built things, made things, and took me around when I was a very young child, even to job sites. And I would see his work. I was fascinated with things being built and made, even when I was very young. Nothing made me more excited than to go into a house newly framed, just the studs there. And that fascinated me. And my dad was not a carpenter. He was not into that, but I thought there must be something magic to be able to build these forms with just these narrow little sticks.
Yeah.
They're very common, but they become these very special things. But what I will say is probably my biggest artistic influence really came from the creations that I did with my mother, who loved so clothing for us kids and for her family. It was not her vocation, but it was something she loved.
She did it because she loved it, or she did it because she had to put clothes on your back?
The first thing you said, she did it because she loved it. What I should say, Adrian, is my family is a very practical minded family, and there's not a lot of room for the aesthetic things in life.
Uh-huh.
It was a very rudimentary and kind of common. They appreciated values in people, and so the artistic things were not really spoken about. But what was fascinating is my mother, who she loved, that was a little thing she carried. She loved making clothes and the creation of them. And I found out later in life that it wasn't just the making of the clothes, but she loved the idea of imagining designing them, even though she didn't ever really design any. But what I wanted to say about
I want to stop you there for a second, because I don't know whether you know my background. So I did, for about 17 years, I was a fashion designer all around the world. Not long before I drew houses. So being dyslexic at school, there was no path for me. So my marks were like, other than art, I was a straight A student in art. And then I was just a straight A student and being disruptive for everything else. And I wanted to be an architect, but there was no path to architecture without what we would call university entrance. And so I couldn't be an architect. And my mother used to make clothes the same as your mother. And she wouldn't buy me clothes. So she taught me how to make clothes and the analytics of making clothes. So I surpassed her within like my first year of making things. I was making patterns. I was like designing things. I was your mother in that respect. I'm not an artist. I'm a designer. I have to have a purpose for what I'm doing. An artist will create because they love to create. You Jess, as a writer, maybe create because of the love of creating. I need a purpose to kind of make me want to do it. And that whole thing, I'm with you on the journey, and I probably learned more about the construction of things from the construction of clothing than long before I really learned about the construction of building.
Right. Well, and that's a great story. I love it. Coming from Lubbock, Lubbock is a very homogenous place. There's a lot of banality there, and I would say that there, as I say, there's some beauty in that banality, and there's meaning in it. But as I say, there wasn't a lot of room for grand gestures and expressions of art that seem superfluous to life. But this little granular of creativity that came into my family through my mother's hopes and dreams, I picked up on somehow. And I can recall, you may appreciate this, I can recall laying out these patterns of this very thin, translucent paper.
Almost like butter paper.
Like butter paper that had all these precise instructions on them, where to cut and to nip them and to place them. And my mother would put it on the fabric and hold it in place with these butter knives that she would help take out of the cupboard. Anyway, and then she'd cut the pieces out. I too had some experience sewing and making some. I made some pants. I can remember getting excited. This may tell you how young I was. She took me to a fabric store, and at the fabric store, I could wander. I was just tall enough to wander under all the bolts of fabric to where they were over my head, where I could just run through them like they were curtains over my head. And I came upon this fabric, which just fascinated me. And I grabbed it and I took it to my mother. And I said, "We have to have I need something made out of this." And if you were to see it today, you would laugh. It was literally some sort of a printed, almost a canvas material, that the print of it was a wood grain printing with actually prints of things like cargo here. And I thought that was just the most fascinating thing. So I begged her to make me something, and she made me overalls out of what were
Oh
wood.
God, I wish you still had them. I wish you still had them.
I really wish I did.
Isn't it fascinating? Like, and isn't it fascinating that you went to, like, she made you the workwear, but then on the other side of it, it was something that was like back to the structure of houses and, you know, like
Yes,
timber and
I needed wood.
natural materials. I love that. How fascinating. You know, I think with clothing, I wanted to do, when I knew I couldn't go and do architecture, I wanted to do an apprenticeship as a tailor to really learn, but there were nobody giving any apprenticeships out as tailors. That was a dead art, like it was gone. Then learning clothing and methodology, you know, like the handling of fabrics, how they react differently on the bias and stuff. And you know what it's like when you get with the most amazing carpenters and they pick up every stick and look down it. They never pick up a stick without rolling it, looking at it, and then deciding whether they're going to run it left to right or, you know, vertically this way or that way, because they can see where the strength of the stick is.
Yeah.
That just fills my heart up when I'm around those guys. Like, I've got a guy who I work with a lot, and he has that same thoughtfulness. You know, if you're going to laminate two sticks together, well, they got to work together, you know, otherwise one's going to work in tension against the other. And he just, it's his whole being is to be that way.
Yes.
And that same thing with fabric, you know, then you can always tell a homemade shirt if they don't know how to sew because the collar's got a twist to it.
Yes.
Every time one side hangs lower than the other. And it's a method. It's just methodology. And most people don't know the methodology to make it work. And, you know, like it's that thing of, you know, it's the same as designing. It's like that foundation thing. It's the same as designing. If you don't get it right down below, the rest of it's not going to work so well up top, you know? It's like, yeah, what a cool story.
The interesting thing about that, talking about that craft that you were just mentioning about the skills necessary, the technique of design and putting things together. Fast forward for my career, essentially when I went to architecture school at Texas Tech, we were given a very technical background. And what happened is when we got out of school, we could draw buildings, and we knew how to communicate about buildings physically. And just a quick side note, when I got to Morgover Harper Architecture and they hired me, I was the first Texan they had ever hired. And this was back when there was about 24 people there. I consider myself the 24th member of Morgover Harper. And when they hired me, they went, "Do they make any more like you in Texas?" Because what happened is that they were hiring everybody from Yale who came with all the theory and the design and the ideas, but didn't know anything about how to draw a building or how to put a piece together. And so anyway, I introduced that firm to the Texas, I'll call it the technologies that came out of my education. But what I didn't have, so this led me to something, and that is what I wanted to say is that I got most of my design education, and I'll call it the artistic side of architecture, after I got out of school, and I began to work at a firm that talked about ideas and concepts, and I started to see different people approach ideas from a different way. That's when I started my real design education. But what I probably need to do to answer your question about Jessica's introduction to the firm is tell you kind of how we fit together. And what it's like is that when I started my practice, I was one of those technicians, draftsmen. I have the drafting tools. I knew how to I knew how to do very precise drawings. In fact, the first drawings I did for the firm when I went to work for them, I was so proud of my technique and my drawing style that I did every hand-drawn drawing with ink. I didn't use pencils. I was so skilled at drawing that I knew I wouldn't have to erase the line. I could draw it, label it all in ink. Anyway, I developed and became quite known for my skills as as a draftsman and a communicator, and eventually a renderer, somebody who would render ideas and communicate not my ideas, but somebody else's idea. And so as a result, what happened, Adrian, is I found myself really very passionate about learning how to make other people's ideas better. I was a very good editor. I listened very well. I cared very deeply about making my bosses happy or their clients happy. And I was very liked as a collaborator because I really didn't have myself in the way. I didn't. One of the reasons I didn't is I really didn't know what to add creatively, like as a design idea. I just simply had my skills to play on. And so when I finally started my own practice, probably about 12 years after arriving at Morgover Harper and having stayed there long enough to really miss it for the rest of my life, I still have fond dreams at night about my time at Centerbrook, my about 13 years there. Loved that place, loved the people. It was hard to leave. But when I left, Adrian, to start my practice, because I always, what I probably got from my father was this: he started his own electrical contracting business, and he kind of gave me that sense of independence. And I wanted to try and to see if I could be an architect, and in the way that an architect wants to be an architect, not to do other people's designs, but to figure out what it is that you have to say. And I convinced my wife to let me do this, go out on my own, even though I wasn't sure I even knew how to do it. I didn't know where to get a client. I didn't even know what a philosophy of design was. I just started working. I started looking for clients. And what I wanted to say is that I began on that path with this idea, with one single idea, and that was that I thought was my own, and that was that I had learned from Charles Moore's teaching that the human aspects of architecture, that understanding human beings and what architecture meant to them was paramount in doing good work. And what I decided to get interested in on my own was the personal aspects of it. What does it mean to an individual? And so I said to my daughter one time when she asked me after she had made a decision, I'll let her tell you more of her story, but when she had made a decision to go to architecture school and to consider coming to work with me, she had said something. She wanted to know what I was about. Why do you do what you do? And this was a hard question for me because, frankly, all I had done on my website at that time was put down the draftsman's answers. I was just saying,
all the technical.
I'm going to answer the right questions. I'm going to try to make it fit you, and etc. But I said something to her which she picked up on, and that was, I said, if you had to boil me down to one thing, I do care about the world, and I would like to make the world better, but I have a very strong focus, and that is that I design houses, I build houses. So I'm trying to make the world better one house at a time.
I love it. I love it.
She picked up on that, Adrian, and she said, if you think that you have something to offer the world, why are you satisfied? offering that to just one client or the one house you're doing. She says, there must be something bigger than that. And that's really what's different, where she has come and added some layer of enlarging.
Yeah, right. I think that's pretty fascinating. I think also that going to that point about one house at a time, the house is one, couple or family, and then the processional value of that is their friends and other family members that also get to experience that space, because I don't think you've probably done one for a recluse that hasn't let anybody through the door yet.
Right.
And it informs its own environment, like it's a part of its own environment. So it does that for the world, but what it does for the people, and go back to what you were saying about that, the study of people, is that it gives me goosebumps when I say this, is that it actually shifts them. And most people aren't fortunate enough to live in good design. They are fortunate enough to experience it in public buildings and public places and stuff like that, but they don't translate that back to their own home. A little more now, because we're so well traveled, people travel so easy. But every time that you design something that somebody, it's a vessel that they live part of their life in, you're making a profound impact over how their life will be lived. And it's a discovery for them and you as it unfolds, like as you do it. Certainly for them it is. You've got purpose and intent and stuff like that in there. And so I love that kind of narrative of, we get to understand the human, those humans and the particulars of those humans, and understand the world in the sense of the site and how that site works, and what would be most honorable for it out of what we're trying to achieve. And then
there's a whole sense of the neighborhood shifting as well.
Yeah.
So there's an influence, like an effect, that having a beautiful home in a neighborhood can shift people's thoughts about themselves and about where they are. And there's a really interesting writer, Gloria Enzaldúa. She's a Chicano writer, was a Chicano writer, and activist.
What writer?
She's Chicana, so she's Mexican American, and she was an activist and a writer and a teacher, and she talked about borders being these imaginary things, and that it's really quite
till you put a wall on them.
Crazy how much emphasis we put on them. And when you think about property lines, they're these imaginary lines on drawings that the city gives us, and if you sort of in a way ignore them past code, obviously, but you ignore them in a way and you design for a neighborhood, you're now creating something, because you're all sharing this need to deal with water. You're all sharing this need to deal with what's happening with the air quality. And so all these trees are all part of an urban forest. And if you embrace the lack of borders to the project, what I was noticing in Nick's work is that he had a way of doing that very naturally, to where he was designing in a very sensitive manner, not just for his project, but in sensitivity to the history of what was there before, to the land, to the people next door, to the neighbors. And I said, you're already creating a bigger conversation. You're just not using the language to express it. And so taking that idea, being able to really express it with him, show him how I see his work.
Yeah.
That was always something that got me excited about architecture, was realizing that even if I could never find my own vision as a designer, I would be able to uplift his. I would be able to be a part of his and enlarge his ability to speak about the land and about neighborhoods and about communities. And I found that through that desire to uplift his story and create that story for him and for others to learn about what he was doing, I found myself through that.
That is so beautiful. That is so beautiful. That's like, yeah, we could finish right there.
What I have to add to that is this. Jessica was a very precocious young child. She was.
Whoa. I don't know
Yeah,
about
yeah, I don't know about that. No, I think that's just a narrative he's making up here. Yeah.
Sorry. I'm a partner, but I'm also a father.
Yeah, I don't think you got that bit right though.
Yeah. But what I wanted to say is that she's very creative and interested in everything. And one of the things that concerned me as she grew up is that she would go from one thing to the other, to the other, to the other, just experiencing everything. And
when will this girl settle down and get on track? Is it ever going to happen, Jess?
It may not. I have these micro obsessions that just grow and explode, and I'll become micro obsessed with something that I want to explore and learn about. And one day I'm wanting to learn how to be a farmer, and the next day, you're out saying, okay, I could definitely be a welder. And then, 5 minutes later, you're like, I'm definitely going to write a novel. This is what I'm doing.
Yeah. So we never know where she's heading, but I did want to just say that what's been exciting is that she did not show any interest in architecture other than just, she was always around as, obviously as a young architect, trying to make some space for myself in the field. She met a lot of architects and she saw a lot of good architecture, and she was raised around a lot of experiences that I never had. But she was interested in theater and in singing and in plays and all these other things before she was interested in photography, that led her into film, that led her into other things before she ever considered architecture. And I just want to tell the story of how she basically came back to Texas and even gave architecture a chance. And that is, I wasn't enticing her to that, but she was a bit discouraged with some of the experiences she was having when she was living in New York City, and called me up and said, and maybe she had changed a job or something. And I convinced her. I said, why don't you come back to Texas? And I'm just finishing a project. Why don't you video a project for me? I'm interested in trying to show what I've just done with the client, and I don't really have a lot of exposure here in our market here. Maybe you could take your skill and make some kind of narrative story out of a design that I'm just completing. She did that. She came back home. She put together a video for a house a mid-century modern house I had renovated with a wonderful client. And my client got to meet Jessica as she was doing this work and giving me nudges about, hey, I see what you're dealing with here. Very creative, imaginative person. And I wanted to tell you that story because what she came just to help me out to tell a story with moving pictures about how a space got transformed from a 1950s space to a 2000, I'm trying to remember what year that was. It was about 2000, just the beginning, 2000.
Early 2000. No, it was probably 2010s. Yeah, somewhere around there.
Maybe even that. But
you've got to send me a link to this piece of work.
Oh, sure.
We'll do this. But Adrian, here's the fun part. Because she basically met 3 of my clients who were the most special women. Very
sounds like the Golden Girls. Yeah.
Yes, they did not know each other, but they're very strong. Each one of them very independent. Some of them actually having public positions. So what Jess asked me one night after we had seen some of my clients, and she was kind of helping me take notes at job sites, etc. She says, I get it, Dad. I know what I now see what you're doing. She had never seen that that exchange between an architect and an owner, somebody who is, they're revealing themselves to the designer in a very intimate way. And that personal exchange was so exciting for her to learn about. She said, I never understood that's what architecture included. She eventually ends up going back to school, et cetera. That's a long story, but I wanted to say this, because she's ended up back in working with me. And by the way, I don't really know why she's doing that.
She knows you need the help. Yeah. She's told me that already. We've had a conversation. Yeah.
All right. I get that now. But I will say this, it does allow, it is quite special, because as you know, it's one thing to work with somebody that you care about and that you love. It's quite another to work with somebody that you care about, love, and are able to have an appreciation for what each other are offering.
Yeah.
We are working well together. It's a bit of a surprise for me, not that we didn't get along, we got along great. But I know, having worked with a lot of other people designing, that it's almost a miracle when you find somebody that when you work with them on a design, that you help each other, that you add to each other, and that there's not a struggle, that
there's a loss of ego.
I was about to say, ego's parked, and
yeah,
but you also don't have a patriarchal relationship like in design. It's, like, Nick, you could be, I'm your dad and I'm telling you how it is. And Jess would kick your ass all the way to New York City for that.
Yeah.
And you know that as well. And that's part of the respect. It's like, so I've got 2 daughters, and
yes,
the stuff they frown about, the looks they give me with some of the stuff I say. I had dinner with my 21-year-old last night. She doesn't live at home. I went for dinner with her, and just the 2 of us. And I was asking her for her advice about something to do with the entertainment industry, basically. And she's worked in it as well. And she's saying, she's giving it to me like, not like you're my dad. She's giving it to me like, like when we were saying about Jesus and Kate, about with, this is how I see it. This is what you're not seeing.
Yes.
Because this is what happens on the other side of that. This is what happens on the inside of that. And I came away going, wow, I had a beautiful, not father-daughter discussion. I was taken on the journey of her knowledge. And whilst I had preconceived ideas about some of those things, she took me somewhere where I didn't have that. She took me somewhere where it expanded my mind into it, and it gave me points of view that I would have otherwise brushed past. And I can imagine how you 2 are doing that. Like, it's glorious.
It's really special. And there's actually a real nuance to being able to design between 2 people who are clearly at very different levels in their career. And so it's first the acknowledgement that Nick's always going to be faster than me and more facile with certain levels of design work, because he's been doing it for 40 years, 35, 40 years. And that's just a given. And then there's also the understanding of, in order for this to work, this has to be a fun process. Like, we have to both enjoy the exchange. We have to both exit from the design work and say, I enjoyed what I got to provide to that experience. And so it goes back to something that's important in our work, which is that the process always has to be joyful. And so joyful for our clients, for our builders, and for us. And when we started to work together, I would start to think to myself, okay, he's giving me the ability to design with him. And so I have to find a way to overcome being a little bit slower than him. And so what I would do is, before we would have design meetings, I would go home and I would sketch, and I would put all my ideas together. I would draw everything that looked terrible. I would redraw things that looked slightly better. I would have a bunch of ideas, and I stopped worrying about whether the idea was perfect or
Yeah.
whether it was something that's what the client's going to want. I just started saying, here's a bunch of playthings that we can play with in our design meeting and see if these trigger anything in you. And so when I was able to come with sort of this box of ideas, he could then immediately come in, see all the things with his experience that he does, and we would begin to riff together. But
Yeah.
because I've done preparatory work, and to this day, I still do that because it creates a more rich environment for both of us to design faster. And I get to explore sort of my ideas about design individually first.
Yes.
And then I get to see where he's at. And then he gets to explore them with me. So you have to know how to design with someone at a different point in their career.
Yeah, I totally get that. Like, I love that thing. While you were saying it, my mind was racing into, you think of musicians, and a musician will sit with a guitar in a room and just pick, just try out little pieces. And then next thing, they're sitting with another person with a guitar in a room, and they're riffing off each other, which is what you're doing. You're riffing off each other. You're going, oh, okay, so if you wanted to go there, then we would end up here maybe, or this would take us this way. And it's like, yes, you've got a common outcome, but you're playing with the same tools and not boundaries, but same tools and stuff down a road that is full of sparks and highlights, and not so much dead ends, but you're doing some twirls and some twists and some,
yes,
discovery things. It's dynamic, and then it becomes fun. Yeah,
dynamic word.
Yeah, I'm with you. Like, if it isn't fun, oh my God, get us out of there as fast as possible, because we're not going to create magic unless we're having fun. And fun will be hard work, because fun, like, I'm rigorous. Like, I have a belief system that says, if you're not doing hard work, then you're not working, it's like that is all too easy, that other stuff. So okay, let's play. Now let's nail that stuff down, and I can see that in you two. And, Nick is obviously really good at nailing it down as well. And then finding the journey of that, and the fun and the excitement of it, and the playfulness of it, as children, we all play, we all imagine, we do that. And I think one of the things I see, talking to so many architects, is that architecture has, a huge manual of compliance. And every piece of that manual of compliance could have you sued and you lose everything off, the shirt off your back. And we both live in highly litigious countries. People aren't necessarily so great at taking responsibility for themselves, So it's this thing where there's the weight of that. Then we take with architecture, we're about to do something that's going to change a piece of land, if it's virgin land, if it's not, it's going to change a piece of land. It's going to change people's lives. It's going to be a monument to whatever it is in this space. So then there's this next piece of weight that comes with that, We're getting further and further away from playfulness all the time. And yet we're trying to create something of joy and beauty for the people who live in it. And the ones who see it.
It's in us. And that's what I think is amazing, is that there's playfulness, the memory of how to be imaginative like you are as a child is in every single one of us. And sometimes it's just asleep. And so you have to find the tools that you need to use to awaken it.
You know, I'm doing a project at the moment, and it's like it's like a semicircle home, and it's a helix as well. So it's only a single story. And my inspiration for it was like the feathers and the tail feathers of an eagle. And I want light to fall into it from certain angles. And
Okay.
that's why it's a helix as well. I want to block some and I want to gain some, but the way I can form it on this piece of land is this. And I've drawn sketches and, you know, blah, 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 all those kinds of things. And I was talking to another friend of mine who's an architect, and I said, hey, I'm working on this thing, and I'm kind of wondering if I want it to be a single room thick all the way around. I want it to have light from both sides. And it's not a big house. And I was like asking a question about something, and he asked me, what are you trying to get to? And I said, oh, you know, light and air, you know, kind of thing. And he said, no, but with what's your inspiration for this? And I said, oh, well, it's the feathers, you know, it's the way the feathers layer out. And then when they flare them to slow down or something, it allows air to, you know, to go through them. And he goes, oh, okay, so that's what matters. Right. Okay. And then we talked about how that might be formed or what might happen, you know, and he kind of added that playfulness to it. But I ran all the way to analytics. But in my mind, I've got these feathers moving and, you know, the light glancing off them. And it's a play thing, you know, it's like this, it's a thing of beauty. And then I'm thinking about, you know, hard sticks and steel.
Yes.
And bits of glass, and I'm trying to analyze not how to, but what I want it to do and what will work best with it. And it's like, how do you stay in that playfulness of movement and dynamics and, you know, the joy of it, and then somewhere you've got to get into chopping it into pieces and making it work. I love that story.
Adrian, this goes back to something we talked about when we first got together today.
Yeah.
And that is that this idea of caring. I love the story you told me about your friends from Tucson that were saying that they somehow they came from a place to begin with. They would never think of giving you advice without having given it due consideration, and I would use the term love. That they have an appreciation for life, that they can share something on that human level that's touching and meaningful. And I wanted to say something about what we care about in architecture, and it's very similar to that. And that is that when somebody comes to us and puts their dream in our hands, and they say, we see you're doing something, we don't know how you're doing it, but please lead us. It's a huge responsibility that we take on with that same kind of level of care and concern and love and attention to detail and process. And one of the things that playfulness that you guys were just discussing that I liked is that one of the reasons why this works so well for us is that one of the things that I learned in design was that ideas come from everywhere. Yeah. And what we really have to do is we have to open ourselves up and be ready to recognize when a better idea takes a place of what was also a pretty good idea. And so oftentimes it's this evolution. And if you enjoy that process, you don't mind ideas that where they come from, some of them end up on the floor and never to be seen again, or maybe they go to the next project because the idea is worth it, but it doesn't fit here. But that's where the play comes. And what I would say, part of if I love to use the word, I should tell you, my daughter has married a renowned chef, and he makes food. It's art.
Yeah,
it is just art. And what I wanted to say is that I think of taste. And one of the things that I think that Jessica, I mean, sorry, I lost my train of thought there. I wanted to say about how things.
The play and art of food.
Yes,
Yeah.
that there is a taste to things.
Yeah.
That they feel that it builds you, it fills you, and anyway,
And we're inspired by him, by his family, which is a very special family that came from Mexico and created these restaurants with recipes from their grandmothers and great grandmothers, and it's lovely to be a part of that family now and to bring that in with my family. And it's sort of exactly how when we see what we're talking about when we talk about design, it's that it's a process of learning and riffing, like you said, off of another person and what inspires and excites them. So Nick, a few years ago, was invited to do a talk for an architecture program that was in the Northeast in Connecticut. And so they asked him to talk about what inspires him and his journey into architecture. And so I helped him work on this to develop the story and to put the narrative together about his life and his career. And it's entitled Land Building Spirit. And
really?
that project that we put together, and he gave a wonderful talk. I think it's online on YouTube somewhere, but he gave
you got to find it
wonderful.
for me. You keep
I
teasing me.
will. It's a wonderful talk. And what was interesting was that we ended up developing these tenets, these ideas that really became the foundation of what inspires him. And as we began to work together and we took that talk, it began to show up in the things we were writing together. And I began to add my own chapters to this talk and to this story. And then it's now evolved itself into where our website is now reflecting a lot of what came through that talk, including a lot of the things that I'm learning about myself and about the design world and what I'm bringing into it. So you see this, it began as his story, but in some way, I never needed it to be my own.
Your both of your story.
It's now our story.
Yeah.
And that grouping of our story is really, as you said, that loss of ego and that desire to uplift one another. You know, no one will be more invested in my career than my father. And
yes.
No one will be more invested in his legacy than his daughter.
You. Yeah. For our listeners, I want you to take note of this if you can write it down. Their website is ndjda.com. And when you go to this website, just look for these 4 words, because this is everything encompassed in 4 words: spirit, echo, voice, and touch. And allow yourself the moment to breathe out when you read each of those words and take on your meaning of them, and then go and discover their meaning of them, because it is a beautiful journey that you've set up there. It's something that if you take the time to breathe with it, you are going into your land building spirit. And now that you've told me that story, I'm like, oh yeah, thanks very much. Now I get it. Now I get it. Like you put another piece into the puzzle for me. When I discovered those 4 words on your website, I'm like, this isn't going to be an ordinary conversation. I'd like to thank Stetson Hats Australia for providing my amazing collection of open road Stetson hats. Since 1865, John B. Stetson has been crafting legendary headwear, adorning the heads of Western icons like Annie Oakley and George Custer. The open road hat debuted in 1937, beloved by artists, outlaws, presidents alike. Its timeless style fits the setting from city streets to open plains. Whether in the cab of a truck or my trusty Mini Cooper, the open road is all style. If you think hats aren't for you, you just haven't found the right one yet. Discover yours at stetsonaustralia.com or stetson.com if you're in the USA. Thanks, Stetson, for your support. Please share your Stetson moment by emailing me your photo to talkdesign@gmail.com. Let's celebrate the timeless allure of Stetson together. And then go back to the thing that we were talking about before with, Jesus and Cade from Dusty B. And when you ask them for their advice, how thoughtful and with love, they share their advice, but with the weight of they know what their advice means or what their advice could mean for you. And I think a lot of the time people have no idea. And this is one of the things I love about the podcast. They have no idea that architects in general, and I would say out of the ones that are on my podcast, that there's different varying degrees of this, but their absolute care, attention, love, and will to give way beyond anything that is commercialized.
Mm-hmm.
Is heartwarming and beautiful. And out of it, people get to either experience buildings or live in buildings that change lives. And the architect gets a few pictures of what they've done at the end of it, and probably a beautiful journey and a lovely lasting relationship afterwards. And
Mm-hmm.
it is, people say, oh, do we need an architect for that? The answer is yes. The answer is which architect do you need? Because if you realize that this is what a great architect will do for you, and when I say great, I don't mean an architect who has just got a big name or whatever, but they will dig into your personal story, your history, the history of your land, the history of your space, the greater environment. Max Levy, that we were talking about before, he said to me, him and I ended up talking about Eckhart Tolle, or Eckhart Tolle, some people say, Eckhart Tolle, and we were talking about the space between the space where God exists. Now, I started that conversation. Did I think I'd be talking about Eckhart Tolle with him? No. And you end up in this place with somebody who is representing that level of love, awareness, thinking, conscience, being in the moment, in the God force of life, in the universe. And he's distilling that down. And just like you guys are distilling that down for 2, 4, 6 people that may live in a space, and that space will get lived in by other people in the future as well. But all that intention, love, and outcome that happens, where's that in the architectural manual? Where's that piece that people understand that's how much care and attention you're giving every person that you work with?
There's that idea that when you create something really meaningful to your client, to your now friend, when you create something that is meaningful to them, it becomes lasting, even beyond them, because it's something that is cherished. And I think that a lot of times younger architects see the lifespan of their buildings in terms of the ownership of it, or in terms of the longevity of the materials, and they don't realize that this can live on, and that there's this beautiful wave that it creates.
I have something
a person goes from being in one beautiful a child, right, goes from being privileged enough to be brought up in a beautiful architectural home. And I want to play another scenario on this as well. And they don't even know why design is enhancing their being and their life at that point. And then they'll discover some things where it doesn't do it. And they will remember even more clearly what theirs did do. And because we tend to, focus on the things that are discomfort rather than comfort, and then we learn the comfort we had. And then when they go and they have that opportunity again to do something, they go, oh, we know what we need to step. The platform's already raised. And then they step from there. And if they find somebody equally as thoughtful to journey with them into that, then that raises that platform one more time. And then the processional value goes out again. And, you know, and it spreads. And then you get the people who brought up in very, very, very simple. My person for this is Dolly Parton. You know, here she is, brought up in the Tennessee Mountain Hills or wherever it was, and with nothing, not nothing, but, you know, with very little. And the nature outside of her door became her playground. And that's where she took all her love and inspiration and soaked it in from outside. And I have this thing now with, you know, homes. Well, I always had this, but homes need to be so engaged in their environment. You know, the siting of a home and these things that people don't even think. They think, oh, you know, there's a lot, we put a house on it. You know, it's a facade in a backyard. I don't know. It's like, if that's all it is, really, after all this love and pouring of your heart and soul into make it, it's got to be more than that. Got to be more than that.
Adrian, I have a story that you might be interested in. It was kind of a pivotal moment for me in my design education. When I was at Centerbrook, they had a thing that they instituted called a traveling grant. And what they would do is for a particular individual a year, they would pick that was particularly dedicated and a lot of great work or something. They would give you an extra week off and a stipend to go travel anywhere in the world, study any architecture you want, and just come back and do a luncheon conversation with about what you've learned. And so it gave me a chance when I got my chance to do that. I traveled to Venice and I studied some work I wanted to study the work of Carlo Scarpa. I was not as familiar with. But what I wanted to tell you is not about Carlo Scarpa, but when I got to Venice, I had this opportunity to go to the Biennale, and I visited this Nordic pavilion that was done by this architect, Sverre Finn. And I don't know if you're familiar with him. Sverre Finn is his name. And I looked at his work and it really changed the way I thought about architecture. I learned about the building. It's quite unusual. What I found out about the building was that his intention was to transport Nordic light into Venice. And the Nordic light being obviously more diffused and thick and maybe gray, as opposed to the bright tones of that Italian atmosphere. And when I went into that building, it felt like I went underwater. I literally moved into a different atmosphere. And if you look into that building that he designed there, which he did, he may have won a competition to do it and may have done it as a young man, but essentially he diffused light through 2 layers of 3 feet tall by 3-inch thick concrete beams, just one on top of the other, 2 layers thick. So light is passing through 6 feet of white painted concrete to diffuse, to come into the space, to become that kind of Nordic light. Anyway, it took my breath away, and it made me realize that architects can work on such a higher plane than simply adding square footage to a space, meeting a few needs and hopes that a client brings to you. And when I studied some of his work, there was a phrase he said, to design something, an architect needs to put themselves inside the object or inside the building that they're designing. He even went to the trouble of drawing himself in a sketch form inside a vase where he was the shape inside the vase as a
Love it.
person. And that thought of going inside of something to find it kind of gave me an inspiration. And that was that while architects spend all our time trying to put people in great spaces, what Jes and I are trying to spend time thinking about is how do we put spaces and architecture inside people? And what it is that people have their own, they have their own memory of their space. They have their own connection to it. But if you, as an architect, haven't spent the time creating that gravitational force between their architecture and their body, or their mind, more specifically, if you haven't brought them together, then you've left an opportunity unexplored. And anyway, it was an exciting notion. And I have to admit that I'm not sure we know at all how to do that, but it is a goal we set on every project. What is this project going to live inside our client?
I'm still in it, man. I want the same. I don't think I've looked up since you started talking because I'm writing so frantically, even though this will be transcribed. Yeah, like to put it. Look, when I have conversations with people, especially architects, that there's a piece of 1,000 buildings inside them. And when you described it that way, I'm like, running through my mind is all the different architecture I go into and the pieces of it that are in here now. And, you know, like how I get inspired by one piece, and then my, I suppose, brain is looking for, I suppose, recognition of it again. And then I discover it even more beautifully done or more simply done, and more, it takes me on a deeper journey into it because I'm discovering it. I love it. It's like, you want to put the memories of the architecture inside the people. And I have clients who say it as well. I grew up in this house and it had da 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 da, and I want that again. Like
they long for it. You know, there, of all the buildings inside both of us, I think we both traveled in different directions to explore the built environment for ourselves. Nick with going to Italy as a young architect. And before I started to get into architecture, I also wanted to explore. I had been living in New York City. I was working in the film industry at that point. And I felt like there was something that I needed to see in the world. And I ended up teaching in Nicaragua in Central America. And I was supposed to stay for about 3 months, and I just couldn't leave. And so I stayed for over a year teaching computer classes in a very rural community of about 2,000 people at the time. It's much bigger now. And what was interesting was that I started to notice the way that the revolution there still lived in the buildings, and the way that people were separated during that time and had found their way back to one another, the way that community involved everyone's efforts, and that these buildings were all connected to one another. You would have one yard leading to another yard, and everything was very connected out of necessity, you know, survival, really.
Truly the village.
Yes. And when I came back and I started to go back into the film industry, when I returned, I was unsatisfied with creating stories about fictional places or moments in time, really. And I started to want to create something lasting that would also be able to incorporate that history, that would be able to connect to a real history of some place, of something in time. And so I brought that with me into the field when I started working with Nick on that first film we did together, Mirror House. And thinking about that project, actually, the film we did together, Mirror House, was one of the pivotal moments for both of us, because it's what inspired me to say, yes, I'm not quite sure what I'm seeking, but I think I need to let go of the film industry for a bit, and I need to go seek this out and search this out. And the clients were just these lovely folks that were displaced after Hurricane Katrina. They had moved
Yep.
to Austin after that. And the way that their love and their art that was from New Orleans and the things that they had brought with them, even sort of the pain of what they'd gone through to come here, a lot of that was expressed throughout all of their things, and the way that they looked at light, the way that Nick was able to communicate with them and then show that as a story about their life.
Wow.
And I started to realize that you could create things like buildings, like houses, that could tell stories. And after I thought about that, I said, I'm all in.
All
I'm all
in.
in.
Yeah.
I went straight to architecture school. So in a way, we both traveled abroad to go and
Yeah.
learn more about ourselves as young designers.
I love that story. I love that story. Hey, can you just give me 2 seconds? I just need to sort something with my daughter who is just
Sure.
here. 1 second. I'll just pause us. Just 2 seconds. I'll be right back. Here we go back. That story of, like, you know, bringing those life experiences into architecture. And what we do also, though, is, and you know, this is what you guys do, is you bring your client's life story in at the same thing. And you know, earlier, Nick, you said about them being, you know, intimate, how intimate it is, and it's the level of vulnerability. You know, I remember first listening to Brené Brown and going, what's this vulnerability stuff? You know, like, here we go.
Mhm.
And then I fell in love with her and and totally understood what it meant in a design sense to be vulnerable, and for
Mhm.
how you, when you get your client to that point, then the magic really starts to weave. You know, it all comes together so more magically, and you know, everything wins. The environment wins, the people win, everything like that. I have some. I go.
Sorry, Adrian, I was going to just riff off of that and say that may be a little bit of the magic that you're talking about with Kate and Jesus, other creative people who are, where the magic is that it's that moment, that connection that they're willing to make with somebody, and that gift that they're giving. There is an emotional thing there that obviously we don't, you know, we've used terms like love and spirit, and sometimes that may feel uncomfortable when you're talking about somebody's space or house or something more technical. But anyway, I just thought that was a nice thing that ties together a whole conversation about love being a part of the whole experience of making a place in nature and in the world.
Mhm.
Yeah, it's a really interesting thing. This, it can't not be. And then, you know, when I think of how privileged I am to talk to so many designers and beyond architects, and you know, like, I just interviewed the other day, it's yet to come out. Have you heard of the Sweet Assassin, Adriana Zumbo? Anyway, he's been on TV in America and through there, and he's a dessert maker. And again, highly creative. You know, people who create food and people who create music, the artist in them, you know, really becomes engaged. And then again, they create these things and then they put it out there to get, you know, beaten and eaten and whatever by the rest of the community, you know, like, and they probably do it even in a way more public way and more immediate way than it happens in the design of architecture, you know.
Mhm.
And it's not just art, it's designed for a purpose, for something. And I look at all those things and I go, in the design industry, the joy of being able to talk to so many people that care so deeply about it, they could take their skill set and apply it to something that would give them a way, way bigger amount of money than they will ever earn doing this, but maybe never the sense of satisfaction of taking something so complex and adding so many layers to it. Well, just add another couple of humans to it, and that adds a few layers to it.
Yes.
And, you know, doing their sleepless nights and all the rest. And that transition that you said from, you know, going from being the technician who's like to pencil, I'll do this in pen because I know I can put it where it needs to be, to being the designer with all those technical skills, and then having to be, you already had that empathy for listening to what others were trying to get to and seeing where they were trying to get to and then translating for them, but then taking that next step into creating it yourself at that point. Yeah, I just, it is the most beautiful journey and fascinating journey, and probably one of the most misunderstood stories or journeys that exist out there. People don't realize.
Which is why I want to write. I want to reach people. You know, it's like, how do you connect people to what architects do if not, you know, users of architecture or users of architects? If they're not hiring us, there's got to be a way to still have that communication and to still have that dialogue with them, because the conversation about architecture is what's important, is that we're all sharing our stories and that they're understanding why architects are purveyors of culture, why we're here.
Mm-hmm.
And so that we can help translate what's happening in our communities, in our neighborhoods, in society as a whole. We can translate that on a much bigger scale in buildings, one house at a time.
Yeah, I want to ask you a little bit about the term that you used, which was, you know, land building spirit. I have a methodology that I call land whispering, and one of the things that I think most people miss out on when they buy a home is that whether any thought has been given to the positioning of it, because, you know, 80%, 90% of homes are probably just dumped on a bit of land. And, you know, somebody goes, well, the driveway is X amount per square foot, so you want to make it this close to the road, kind of thing, you know, whatever. The positioning and the siting of a home when there's more than, you know, a small lot, or even if it is a small lot, you know, like if it's a small, tight lot, then the design becomes even more important about the positioning and siting. Tell me a bit about your journey with that, like from both of your points of view. And Jessica, I'd love yours from the point of view as also the filmmaker, because I've got a friend, Richard Dejetsky from England, and he studied architecture. I think it was in Leeds in England. And his dad's an architect, his brother's an architect, they're all bloody architects. And he discovered it, he studied it, and they used film as a method of study of architecture. And, you know, the way light changes across a building, and then how many details you see and don't see, etc. So I'd love that, the siting thing, I'd love you to add something from that perspective, and otherwise go for it. Whoever's gets out first, go.
There's a lot of, in film, you're looking at sight in terms of a frame. You're looking at frames. And there's this wonderful book by Andrew Laszlo, cinematographer, called Every Frame a Rembrandt. And it's this idea of creating every single frame as something remarkable that tells the entire story of the scene and the movie or the story from every vantage point. And so each frame is itself telling a story. And in a way, buildings need to do that because they're interpreting your each room, each view, everything in that entire building, including the way that we see spaces, are that they include everything beyond and into the nature that's around it. And so when you start to think about place and site from such a broad perspective, now you're looking at it in terms of, I have to have every frame a Rembrandt. That means that not only can I not treat every piece of this building as special and important, so each detail, each area, each window, each transition has to be thought about and important to the whole of the story of the building. But now you're thinking about who's watching and embracing this? Whose view are we really seeing? And what I like to envision is the view of what birds see, what the rain will see, what water sees, all these things, this idea of where would water want to go?
Where
Do
would
the
wind
trees
go? Yeah.
want to be? Yes, like
Yeah.
where were things originally? There's this wonderful architect, Wanda de la Costa, who's also from Arizona. She's an indigenous architect, and she talks about place keeping. I think she came up with this phrase instead of, I think Charles Moore had placemaking. She talks about place keeping.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
It does not matter.
You just gave me goosebumps again.
Everything, even if you're looking at a parking lot, something was there and it has that history. And so if you can think about how you're creating each moment in that space from its perspective, architects end up becoming like time travelers, really.
Yeah.
You know, we're transporting people to the past to understand what this land was before. And then you're transporting them to the future of what these dreams you have will create in this space.
Wow.
Adrian, see if I can follow that up. I'm going to follow that up with actually an idea that Jes had, even though I'll share it. And that is that when we were talking, when we came up with this, our talk, basically a bit of a story of my journey into architecture that we ended up calling Land Building Spirit. One of the things that came out of that is that we had long conversations about what did land mean? And land's really a metaphor for for nature and for our earth. And it encompasses more than the dirt and the things growing in it. But what I wanted to say is that she came up with this idea that, and this is where this gives you a little clue as to how I work. And that is that she made a comment. She said, you know, land isn't just a resource. We should treat it like an ally. And this is where I'm very good, is that I recognize these things and I say, that's it. That's what we're going to do. We're going to think about land no longer as what we can take from it and what we owe, let's say, the city for it, or we pay some tax on it or whatever. What we're going to do is we're going to consider the land an equal participant in the design process. So we have to ask our land, have we done you justice? Have we pleased you? See, we're trying to please our clients. We're trying to please the city. We're trying to please the historic people, you name it, the neighbors and all that. But we really do think, and it gave us a whole new way of thinking about land. If it was literally a person sitting at the desk,
what would it say to you?
Whoa. What would it say? What would it say when we carved out a big space and maybe excessively did anything? That had a tremendous impact on us, basically reducing our impacts and making us want to be more resource specific. that was one thing I wanted to say about
I,
land.
yeah, there's, I don't know what else you need to say. If, you know, that thing of if it's an equal participant, which it is. In fact, without it, you can't build in the air, you know, even aircraft land. So
That's right.
It's actually like, you know, it's our foundation participant in everything that we endeavor. And if it had a voice that it could talk to you.
Yes, that's the question right there.
And you
voice.
Yeah, and you drew a topographical line with a cut through it. What would it ask of you in return for giving up that piece? And that place keeping, was it Wanda Della Costa?
Yeah, Wanda Della Costa. She's a phenomenal architect and thinker. She's
Let's
also
get her on Talk Design.
We need to. She's really brilliant.
Yeah, that place keeping, again, it gives me goosebumps. It's like that is our, I think, as humans, forget being, you know, working in design and architecture, that's our responsibility. Just like, you know, we've got one air and one water, we've got one land. The thought of it saying, Adrian, really, you want to do that to me? Or Nick, seriously? You want me to you want me to give that to you in return for what? What will you give me? And you go, oh, I'm going to take some water away. I'm going to pour some concrete on you. I'm going to dig a hole on you. Really? You're going to do all that for me? What, how will that make me feel? How will that make me be in the future? And then you do start thinking about that light footprint and that the weight of, if I'm going to take that from you, then what's my responsibility for the future? How do you get our communities to think like that? How do you get the people, you know, the people who drive the bulldozers, and I'm not blaming the people who drive the bulldozers in any way. I'm saying, how do they do their best work with everything that we touch? How do we do our best work? Because it's not going to be good enough, even our best work, for what we take to, you know, for the human sprawl of, you know, using land. And then you go back to our native indigenous communities who worked everything with the land. You know, I think of in Australia, the First Nations people here, and there's this big thing, you know, I know you've got some fires in California at the moment, and we have a lot of fires in Australia. I'm actually a Kiwi, but this is where I choose to call home now. But we have fires a lot here as well. And there is a lot where the First Nations people would burn the land. They would deliberately burn it off and regenerate it. And, you know, in our land management things, it's like, oh, well, you don't do that. And I remember being in Muir Woods and on a walk in California in Muir Woods, and they were saying how they suppressed fire for all this time. And then they discovered that the trees didn't germinate the seeds without the heat of the fire. And you go, you know, working with or working against. And we have a huge, you know, I want to say privileged white person legacy of working against everything that surrounds us instead of with what surrounds us. You know, I look at subdivisions and I go, oh, they just bulldoze everything out and then plant new trees. It's like, what happened to, you didn't, you know, you needed a shovel so you didn't dig so much, as opposed to a bulldozer so you could move so much dirt and so quickly, you know, and recontour the land so everything was flat so the building price would be cheaper, you know. And I just go, yeah,
you know,
we're lost in our own demise, aren't we?
What I was going to tell you, this takes us back to our conversation with Jesus. When I first met him, he was the speaker, one of the speakers at a design conference where he was presenting his work on the topic of basically design build. It was designers that actually build their designs. And I listened to him talk, and he talked for almost a half an hour before he showed us any of his work with the reverence of the land that he came from. And I was so ashamed. I thought, here's a young man that has bothered to learn about where he's from, to think about it and to speak about it with a referential tone, like you might do your grandfather. And that idea that we talked about, it's the architects that are the only ones that can give a voice to that land, because the developers won't do it.
Yeah.
The banks won't do it.
Yeah.
Even our population, that our people who may want to do the right thing, they don't know the consequences of what disturbing
of what we
land,
do, of what
Yeah.
we do.
of what we do.
Mm. And we don't.
sorry.
Well, I'm not saying everybody should live in a tent or in a temporary structure or any of those things. I'm just saying that we need to be, as a community, we need to recognize the weight that we wield. And
Yeah.
I think your point of, if the land had a voice and it told us what it thought of what we wanted to do, maybe we would. Me certainly. So I'll go from I have a constantly increasing conscience. And yes, with Jesus and Cade, I get that sense of that. And I don't know whether you saw, Arizona made a little movie clip about different people in their state. And they made one with Jesus, and he's driving with his daughter in the truck, and he's talking about the land that he's. Have a search for it, and if you can't find it, maybe just call them and ask them for it. It is the most beautiful narrative, and him explaining what the land is about and where it is and what he understands of it. And yeah, you'll be transported. You will be transported. And then I go, this is the voice that you're writing, and that these conversations, as we digest everything in our instant world, this is the role of the filmmaker and the role of the artist again, to get this narrative to the people so that the education level lifts, and so then everything steps up, and the world changes and becomes this better place. I've got two. I've got a couple of last questions.
Sure.
One is, one last project, you can never do another one. This is it. Got to hang it up. There is no more architecture, even influencing architecture, you may not do beyond this project. What do you choose?
You want to leave that to me to start?
I'll let you start.
Okay, that's a good, interesting question. I'm not sure that I've ever been put in such a tight position.
The idea is to make it tight.
Here's what I think I could relay to you. As I've gotten older and done lots of architecture for others and even myself, I've gotten more and more interested in what I'll call the emotional aspects of architecture, what really connects to the heart, the human heart.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things that I do as a designer is that in my office, and Jes has had to get used to it, and other people who've been in our office over the years have gotten used to it, and some of them, I don't know if I ran them off that way, but I will constantly be listening to singer-songwriters' music, not typically the most uplifting songs, the ones that are dealing with.
I can see Jes shaking her head.
And she understands.
I have a playlist for him called Dad's Infinite Sadness.
Yeah.
And it's just all of the singer-songwriters that he loves.
Well, there are great ones, Lucinda Williams, Patty Griffin,
Brandy Carlisle,
our locals here. But what I wanted to say about that is that what I've realized as I've gotten older is how important it is to reach people on a level that means something, where there's a resonance, there's there is a vibration that happens, and what Jessica said earlier about a joy. I'm very interested in that. And so what I guess I would have to say is if this was my very last project to ever do, what I would want to do is I'd want to be able to build some place that I could break the code of what it takes to actually say something. So my buildings could say something to each of the human beings that come in, but it has to say something different to everybody who comes in. That would be my challenge. And I don't know if I could achieve it, but that would be a program I might try to write.
I like that.
That's a good one.
So they find themselves and they find their vibration or song or whatever it is. Wayne Dyer says, "Don't die with your music still in you," and I think that's it's a fabulous saying, and imagine dying with your music still in you. And we get to express our music often, but then to do it that thoughtfully is like, yeah. Okay, Jess, you're up.
It's your turn, Jess. Try it.
Oh, the pressure is on. I have so many buildings I'd love to still build in my life.
It's just one.
I can only pick one.
No.
I would say I have this vision of a place that's a home for many, that's a place where you can have many smaller places so that friends can join, people can come together. And I think of wanting to create a place that could tell each one of their stories so that everyone felt when they came that it would be an individual story for them, but they could still be part of a larger community, almost like a place that was thoughtful to the wildlife, something that encouraged regenerative growth through the building, and at the same time was a home, somewhere that you felt repose when you were there and was embracing both of the people that came to it, but embracing of the spirit of the place of where it is. So I think I would try to create this community for others.
I love that. I actually had several conversations with people where it has not been the same as that, but with that underlying thing of creating inclusive space, but still exclusive space. And, from the point of view of it has to be in line with, nature as well. In fact, a friend of mine has a big block of land that she's a real estate agent, but she is so engaged in how we make better space. And she's working on master planning a totally, I want to say it's more than just sustainable, but it's all about sustainable principles as a neighborhood, as a single neighborhood of, I think there's 30 house lots in it. And, the idea is you don't bulldoze it all around. You work with the shape of the land that it is, and then that it is got really strict community things. And yeah, it's right down to the point where there will be probably one overlying design voice throughout the whole area. Although in my discussions with her, I've said, well, I would, whilst I'll be a part of it, I would actually want to engage some others to be a part of it with me. I wouldn't want to be the sole design element, because my voice would be way too narrow. It would be, I would want the challenge and the community and the conversation. I don't believe you could build community with one person's vision. But then I'm not Frank Lloyd Wright. Broadacre City, but I don't believe community comes from one vision. It comes from community vision, and so I really love that. Okay, I've got one last question for you both. This is the last one. It's an easy, but also it's going to take you right back to the architecture that lies within you, because you started it. Your favorite place in your own home, and what emotion it evokes for you.
Okay, I guess That's a good question. I've just traded places from my favorite place, which was my studio. I built a studio, patterned it after a mentor of mine who started his own practice and basically had a walkout basement under his house. So he would have a short, like, and I recreated that here in my house, a studio which was 13. I call it my 13-step commute. So I would come out of our bungalow. I'd walk down 13 steps. I'd be in my studio, which was removed from the rest of the world, and I found that the most satisfying place. It was the place that I could retreat to. I could do the introspective work. I could get excited. I could listen to that sad music.
I like that you put that in the same sentence, Nick. Get excited listening to my sad music.
Yes, but we've recently made a change where we've changed our studio arrangement, where we used to live on top of our studio. What we've done is we've ended up trading that space to a tenant who we love and given them a more extended space down below us. So we have a 2-family house here. By giving them that second level, or that bigger level down below, we've reduced our footprint a little bit further. And what we've actually done is we've traded that separate studio space for what is now, we now actually have a studio which is actually our home. So we don't have an office in our house. We have basically a house in our studio.
In your office.
and my wife has been very friendly about that. She has dedicated her life to being a participant in us exploring how architecture can be sold and communicated to people. Mm-hmm. And so literally our entire upper level is now our studio. So it's a little bit hard for me to refer to one room as a studio. But what I wanted to say is that it's that space to get away where we can, and this bungalow space, which is a little more connected to the street through the regular bungalow scale windows. We have good light up here, but it is not quite as removed as the old space was. If I could have my space, I would have it back. I would go down and have that retreat.
Have your
down
retreat.
below me again.
Yeah. Yeah.
That would be
what space. Emotion does it evoke? Obviously the retreat part of it. What emotion does that evoke if you had to use a word that described it as emotion?
Well, I guess the emotion that I would have is being full, that feeling of being full. Mm-hmm. Just
content.
Just complete.
There's
a sense of, we like to use the word belonging when we talk about our clients, but I guess I would say it's a feeling of wellness, that just a wholeness would be the emotion. I guess I'd try to describe.
I love it. I love it. I think it's fascinating. Jess, you're a writer and as well as an architect. You know how we try to find words for feelings like this?
Yeah.
And I have this quest to understand how architecture responds to emotion. Mm-hmm. And that's why I asked this question, is I want to understand that's a retreat, but then it gives you that whole fullness of being. And we could dig deeper into, well, what is the form of it that does it, or is it the 13 steps? Is it what is it that gets there? But then also to find words for what makes us feel a certain way is so weird. It's so hard. So give me yours, Jess.
I would say in my house, my favorite place is my kitchen. And it's because it's where I get to see the person who inspires me the most, my husband. I get to see him at his most creative. And I get to see the way, there's something very interesting and different about him than and I always say, I am the future and you are the present, because he's so present in every moment. It's almost, it reminds me, I can get lost thinking about ideas, thinking about what I want for the future, about dreams, where I'm going. And to have someone that so easily can live so grounded in every emotion and every moment, it's a joy to me to see him at his most creative, and also to watch the joy that he has in nourishing me, nourishing others. When he creates even something as simple as a plate for breakfast, he's creating something with so much attention and so much intent and purpose. And so he's nourishing you with what he's giving you. And when I see that, I see a reflection of what I want to give to my clients, what I want to give to others, to the world. And so it's absolutely my favorite place, not because I cook, but because I get to be reminded. I get to be present and reminded how special it is to be human.
There you go. There is nothing in this conversation that hasn't been full of love and beauty.
For us,
Yes.
it's been a joy, really. We enjoyed it.
Yes, very much so. I feel that we have a connection. I'll have to come visit you.
Yeah. Oh, I'm coming to see you, that's for sure. I'm planning to be there in October.
Oh, wonderful.
For the
Do you have a
homes tour.
home tour?
I know, I'll be interviewing you about it.
Okay.
Okay.
So yeah, I just love this conversation. I feel, I said, if there's no listeners, it doesn't matter. I want people to listen because of what we spoke about. But believe me, thank you. My heart is full. Like it is, just, and I want to keep talking. Like we could go for days.
Yes.
Same here.
Absolutely.
It's rare in our life to be able to communicate about something that means so much to us, that people understand, and
yes,
and I could hear you. We have a very similar connection, and that whispering. There were many things you said that we understand what you mean and what you're through, and I think we have a lot more to talk about in the future.
I think so. I think so.
For the next time.
I'm planning on being there in October, so let's make sure that we put some time aside to do some things. That would be really wonderful.
Absolutely.
Thank you for everything and being so generous with your time, thoughts, and love, for what we all do and the planet we live on.
You're welcome. It was a joy.
It was really great. Thank you so much.
Thank you. The pleasure was all mine. Thank you for tuning into our conversation. I hope it left you both informed and inspired. Don't forget to subscribe wherever you listen, and please don't hesitate to share your design thoughts with me. It's always a joy to hear from you. If you're like me and crave a deeper dive into design thinking, coupled with a love for travel and adventure, consider one of my architectural adventures. Join me and some of my wonderful design friends and embark on a journey of a lifetime. Apply for an unforgettable design experience at adrianramsey.com. With our clients spanning the globe, I firmly believe behind every great project are great people. If you're a great person and seeking to turn your dream into a reality, I'd be honored to design your home with you. Why not join the ranks of our exceptional clients? And let's make your heart sing. Reach out to me at studio@ardesignhouse.com. That's studio@ardesignhouse.com. And let's get a conversation going and make your heart sing.